You're about to hear from an incredible woman who has lived experience with an eating disorder. She specialises in all things body image, disordered eating, and it's really an incredible conversation for someone or that you love or for the person in you that is struggling and might need to know how to and what to do next. Welcome to 360 Woman. I'm really excited to have you. And I think just a bit of backstory. You and I met at a uni intensive a few years ago, and I'm fairly sure you had no choice but to be my friend. I remember, you know what intensives are like. You rock up, you're there for 4 days, and I walk in, I don't know anyone, and I'm scouring, and I'm like, who's going to be my friend and who am I going to do the work with, right? You know, because we always have to do, recordings and stuff. And I found you. So you didn't have any chance of running from me. And obviously we work together now as well, share a space. And I'm really excited about today's conversation because I think when people hear the term body image and things that are associated like eating disorders and things like that, they've got a very, I guess, small piece of the pie. And what I know you're going to bring to the table and what I'm really excited to explore is the deeper story. And I really want humans, women, obviously, that are probably going to be watching this, to feel like, maybe they've been seen and be some tools of like, whether it's them or whether it's their kids or whether it's their best friend's daughter or whatever. So I'm excited. Are you all good?
Yeah, so excited. Thank you so much for having me along. Like, I feel, very privileged to be here.
Oh, well, you were hand selected. All my people have been hand selected. And so let's do this. So I guess initially, just tell us a little bit about you and I guess how you've landed here in my living room.
Yeah.
And I guess what you do professionally.
Absolutely. So I have a background as a high school teacher and worked for a couple of years in that space, and through building a relationship with young people, really, I guess, had a heart for supporting them in their well-being. So being an English teacher, you would sort of see a lot of themes coming through writing, and that really inspired me to go on and, pursue a master's in counselling where I met you. From there, that sort of taken me across Australia in a number of different roles. So while I was studying, I moved up to the Sunshine Coast and worked with the Butterfly Foundation in their first residential eating disorder treatment facility. So have a real passion for supporting people going through that journey of, struggling with body image or eating disorder concerns. Have sort of worked in a range of different spaces in postvention, supporting people through that journey, as well as prevention. So through education, to sort of identify some warning signs and how to prevent some of those things from, coming to light in people's lives. So and then that sort of landed me back in Adelaide, which I'm very lucky to be back and working in collaboration with you, Lisa. So working to support young people as they navigate some of those challenges, anxiety, body image concerns, eating disorders.
It's amazing. And I think it's fair to say, certainly probably in the last decade, especially, body image has been all over the world, right? Like, I think it's really been brought to the surface, and I think that's amazing. I think there's a lot more conversations about it. There's a lot more resources. And I guess for me, I feel sad that we still even have to talk about it, right? I think that whilst there's been such a spotlight on the subject, do you feel like it's actually got any better with all the resources that are being thrown at it and all the narratives and conversations? Or do you feel like it's kind of still the same?
That's such a good question. I think like you say, it's definitely been brought to light in our conversation much more recently. And we know through the pandemic, there was an increase in, body image concerns and eating disorders in young people. And I think while it's, a much larger conversation at the moment, I think it's only spotlighting maybe what we haven't maybe been aware of for a long time. And we know that eating disorders or body image concerns don't discriminate. Anybody can experience those. And I think for a long time in society, we've sort of held an image of what that looks like or what demographic.
Group. Correct. Correct. And I guess you would see this maybe more than myself, but in fairness, I see a lot of like grown adult women in their 30s, 40s, 50s that might not have been diagnosed with anything, but absolutely have signs and symptoms of eating disorders. Yeah. Are you able to, I guess, share some of your expertise and knowledge around, like, what is an eating disorder? Like, because sometimes I think we've got this real stereotypical, this is what it looks like, this is what it sounds like, but you and I both know that it's not the case.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's really important if you are sort of considering if you might, be at risk of developing an eating disorder or have some of those signs and symptoms, to go and speak to somebody professionally, whether that's a GP or a therapist, a psychologist. But there are definitely sort of screening tools that you can do for yourself and sort of assess your own relationship with your body and, relationship with food. And I think a large factor of that is if it is impacting, your thoughts around food, that you're thinking around your body, if it's impacting on your daily life, like that's a pretty good sign that that relationship is, a bit more complicated than it should be. So I think...
sorry to interrupt, but it doesn't mean that you have an eating disorder. It's just a difficult relationship with your body.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
And I think it's important to communicate that, because I think a lot of women really obsess about weight.
Yeah.
Food intake. You hear women say, oh, well, I went to the gym so I can afford to eat this, or, oh my gosh, I can't do that because, that does, we're not suggesting that that's like signs of eating disorder, but we're suggesting that where there's a consuming of the mind, that it's highlighting something.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's such an important thing to distinguish between, we know in our society there's a lot of emphasis on body shape and weight and, idealized versions of those, which definitely influence the way that we can behave around food or our bodies. But, a large part of that too is, distinguishing between what might just be a disordered eating pattern of engaging in maybe diets or other sort of behaviors around food versus, like you said, a full-blown eating disorder diagnosis.
So can I just, I'm just curious around that disordered eating. Can you give us a little bit more insight into, I guess, examples of what is that? Because it sounds hectic, right? If someone said to me, you've got disordered eating habits, I'd be like, sorry, what?
Yeah,
right.
Sure. Yeah, that's such a great question. And I think, disordered eating can sort of manifest in many different forms. It can look like, engaging in sort of yo-yo dieting. It can be maybe like obsessing around like counting calories or maybe cutting out certain food groups because of not necessarily any allergies or anything like that, but what's just determined good or bad.
Yeah, okay.
So
many of those fads as well, right?
Exactly.
Can't keep up.
Definitely.
Okay. So disordered eating is really around that restriction and I guess a very clear path of this is what I won't do versus this is what I will do.
Yeah, and I think a lot of people can find themselves trapped in what's known as that diet cycle. So people can sort of tend to restrict or put limitations on what they can eat in terms of having that real rigidity around food and having food rules, which can then lead to, restricting themselves to then, potentially binging, or that it can be so many different sort of factors that can play in.
So I guess in the last few years, one of the things that has risen up through the ranks is this thing called orthorexia, which I found really fascinating in the beginning stages when I was reading and learning about it. And orthorexia is that obsession with eating healthy, right?
Yeah.
The obsession around well-being and it's gone too far. Now, I understand that's different to what we're talking about now around disordered eating, but it just shows you, I guess, the pendulum of which we swing constantly.
Yeah,
it's really hard to get the sweet spot, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, part of my experience in that space, I should have mentioned earlier, is coming from that lived experience lens, seeing the way that disordered eating maybe played out in my life, and also through the experience of an eating disorder, orthorexia was definitely part of my journey. And that sort of fixation on like health and well-being and wellness, but at the same time, my relationship and my heart around body image and food and was very complex and really unhealthy. So
do you mind sharing with us, like, what age, just a little bit about, I guess, your story and your age and what you did to come through it? Because I know well and healthy and kicking in life. So just to give us a little bit of a background.
Yeah, absolutely. So I moved schools. I grew up in a really small country town and moved schools when I was 15 into what felt like a sea of students. I had no idea of, anybody at the school, or really just like lost, I guess, sight of who I was and identity. And so, in that period of my life, really struggled internally of just, knowing who I was. But I think there were so many different factors that sort of played into that as well. I think, like I was mentioning earlier, society and the kind of messaging I was receiving around what is an ideal body.
How to look.
Exactly. There was those sort of pressures, but also internally, maybe some predispositions to perfectionism and people pleasing and some other sort of...
I know you and I have talked a lot about people pleasing from both of our stories, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah, we're both recovering addicts.
Yes.
Yeah, we can say that.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think it sort of was this perfect storm of, external factors, internal factors that sort of manifested or... really reinforce this kind of story of, who am I, and what does that look like? What does it look like to be, successful? And at that time in my life, that was really, it sort of manifested itself, through disordered eating and then the development of an eating disorder. And so that looked like, and I think what we were sort of mentioning earlier, that can manifest itself in many different forms throughout the experience of an eating disorder. So for me, that looked like, restricting and then that real focus on health and wellness.
Yeah.
And I think for a long time, it was sort of praised by people because in our society, we can sort of praise that fixation on health and well-being.
It's like, good on you.
Exactly.
That's amazing. Yeah.
And
but it actually has a hold.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And I think I was in denial for a long time around, I thought this was a healthy way.
It's a good thing.
Exactly right.
Okay.
So
How long were you in, I guess, the grip of that season of your life?
Yeah, definitely. I think it was around 3 years. So really grateful that I had, a great support network around me sort of identifying the early...
I was going to say, so how did that all come about? Because often, and there's going to be people watching this that A, this is their story, or B, they've got a child or someone that they love. How did your parents come into the fold, I guess, and how did you navigate your way through it? What were some of the things that worked for you, what didn't work for you? And I guess what was important in those years?
Yeah, totally. I think, reflecting and talking with my parents about it, I think they were, so scared of what was happening.
Yeah.
Because for a long time I was sort of in that pre-contemplative stage. I wasn't even ready to admit that there was a problem.
Okay.
Because again, I was sort of being praised for what I was engaging in and sort of my determination and all those
ambition. And so is it fair to say you didn't look like someone who was struggling with an eating disorder?
I think for initially, that first part. But then, initially had that, like weight loss and a significant drop in weight, which then sort of maybe raise a few alarm bells. But I think it's really important to distinguish there that might not be part of everybody's journey.
That's why I asked, because it doesn't have to look like, skin and bones.
Yes,
right?
Exactly.
Which is often the construct that people consider.
Totally.
Think of, yeah.
Yeah, and I think it all comes back to, that relationship that you have with food and body. And so really fortunate that I had people maybe identifying my patterns around food, and again, like isolation was a large part of my experience. So I would really isolate from social engagements, things around food that we know food
just
brings people.
I'm busy, can't go to.
Exactly. Yeah. And so through that process I was really grateful that had family to connect me in with a therapist and really explore some of those things initially, and then worked with a really beautiful team, so a dietitian, a GP, just in terms of working and healing that relationship with food. And that was like I think, again, like you mentioned earlier, that kind of image we have around this is an eating disorder can be really damaging, because I think while weight restoration was a part of my journey and was grateful to go through that process, my thinking patterns and my approach to food was still really unhealthy, and long after, being weight restored. So it's so important to not sort of box or pigeonhole that.
Correct.
Yeah.
Correct. Okay. And so I guess what would you say to someone who has just been observing in someone they love
Yeah.
What would you say to someone who's in the throes of it?
Yeah.
Right? Like, what would you say? And I know you have these conversations all the time with your clients and parents and loved ones, but looking back as an adult, you know, and I mean, I'd love to chat with your mum. I won't, but I'd love to chat with your mum, you know, like just that perspective of like you were walking through it, but you had people like parents who I think when children go through significant situations like that, as a parent, I can't imagine, I haven't been through it, but I can only imagine as a parent, just the overwhelm and sense of panic and fear of what do we do?
Absolutely.
Right? Like, where do we go?
Yeah.
And how do we help? So if you can maybe start with like what you would say to your younger self, right? And then maybe as sitting opposite a mother, like where do we start?
Absolutely. I think, thinking about my younger self, I would say to her that, and I think I'd say that to the you know, loved ones as well, that you're not alone. You don't have to face this alone. And, you know, I think there's so much messaging out there around for young people today around still, you know, body image and what is an idealized
still, isn't it?
It really is.
Why do you think, and this is going to be a loaded question, right? So take your time, but why do you think it's so difficult for people to accept their bodies, right? Why do you think we're still in 2024 having the same conversations, right? Maybe different, but same, right? Why do you think that is? What have we not nailed in ourselves and as a society?
Oh, that's such a good question. It's a big question. And I think there's so many. We know body image is it's not fixed. It moves with us throughout our life, and it's not the way that we look, but the way that we feel about it, the way that we look. So I think a large part of that we can blame, you know, society and social media. That's a large piece of the puzzle, I think, for many people, especially many young people. But I think a lot of it is, you know, those conversations around body or food that we still maybe perpetuate some of those biases towards what is considered good or bad, which can really formulate, I guess, the approach that we have. So it's, conversations around maybe younger people, like we are those role models in our relationship with our body. And that's a really hard switch to sort of flick in our brain, but it starts in those really subtle ways of the way that we, you know, talk about our bodies in front of other people can have a huge impact on the way that we approach.
And I think even I've observed it amongst women who are parents, like, you know, they'll cook dinner for their family, but they'll eat something different.
Yeah.
And we think the kids don't notice, but they actually do.
Yeah.
You know? And so it's all those subtleties. But I guess I really want to, hit on the topic around self-esteem, because that's got to be, I guess, part of the root system.
Yes.
That's
absolutely.
gone a bit pear-shaped.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the experience of an eating disorder, you know, different elements might come to light stronger in different, you know, as we walk that journey. But self-esteem and body image, they're unique in the way that they're not necessarily connected, but they definitely can be.
And feel like it, right?
Yeah, 100%. And I think that's the really important the really important thing to distinguish there is that, you know, body image is, the way that we feel about the way that we look, not the way that we look. And our self-esteem or self-concept can get tied up in that. But it's really important to consider all the other things that make us who we are, and, you know, our value system, the way that we want to show up in the world. And I think
our minds,
exactly,
you know, all of the things.
Yeah, and seeing ourselves as that whole, you know, version of ourselves, our true selves, rather than all the emphasis that we can place on body.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think self-esteem is, you know, such a big factor in so many different things. And I love what you said about that whole, we need to spend more time, I guess, valuing all of us, right? Every part of us. But I guess a lot of people don't, right? Because it's very one-dimensional. How we feel is related to the way we look. And I think, you know, self-esteem, even outside of this conversation, you know, you would, with other clients, like with my clients and even my own life, self-esteem is like in the driver's seat of our life and we don't even know it, right? And you think about all the times, I think about all the times in my own life where my self-esteem hasn't been fabulous and it's kind of taken me down a dirt ditch road. And there's been consequence to that, right? Or there's, things have happened or, but if we can get a hold and really get a real sense of the weight that self-esteem creates and plays in our life, I feel like it's such a great tool just for humans.
Yeah, absolutely.
What would you say, and this might be tricky, but what would you say is the key or the starting point of embracing and engaging the self-esteem story?
Yeah.
Where do people start when they know? Because I have clients that come in and sit down and literally they sit down and they're like, hi, my name's such and such, just here because I have no self-esteem, right? What do we do with that?
Yeah.
What would you recommend for people? Or how did you start the process of building self-worth and self-esteem?
Yeah, I love that. I think that's a really beautiful thing to explore. And I think for my experience, body image was a large part of, my recovery and my experience in navigating recovery from an eating disorder. But, I think it's so important not to, if we're here and we're at this end of the spectrum in terms of feeling really low in our body image or self-esteem, it's really difficult for us to expect ourselves to jump to hashtag love your body, self-love. That's unrealistic. And I think starting at that place of building just a gentle appreciation for our bodies or ourselves. So thinking of our bodies and the function that they serve in our lives, they allow us to show up and do the things that are meaningful. They allow us to connect and engage with our loved ones, really thinking about ourselves from that lens of, having that appreciation and building that, or just that neutral approach to our bodies. We don't love it, we don't hate it. It's not okay to mistreat our bodies. Sort of starting at that place can be a really powerful and gentle approach to building self-esteem. But I think in that larger conversation, like you were mentioning, really seeing ourselves as, a whole
being.
Yeah, a whole being, and all the things that we have to offer in that, in all that aspects and areas of our lives. And I think a large part of that for me was really diving into values work and exploring who I want to be, who I want to show up as, and what values are really important. And for me, the experience of an eating disorder definitely was at odds of the values that I wanted to pursue in life.
Yeah, wow, okay. I love what you just said about body neutrality, because I think it's okay to be in a space of, I cannot sit here and say to people, I love my body when I hate it, right? Like, because that's just doing the power of positive thinking or, speaking. And I think that there's something powerful about going, you know what, it's okay to not love it, to not hate it, but just to be a bit meh in the middle. And I don't say that lightly because I'm not a meh girl, right? But I think giving people permission to go, like, let's not pretend. Like you said, you can't come from over here and then, guess what? Now I love it, right? Because that's not real. And I think that's not doing the work. So finding that place and position of, I'm okay with just in the middle, because I think that's honest.
Absolutely.
And maybe that's where some of the body image language and I guess programming has got it a bit wrong.
Yeah.
Because I see it all the time. You love your body, do this, do that, rah, rah. And it's like, well, you and I sit with people that just don't.
Yeah.
And they can't just switch it on. And if they're just switching on, then it's fake and they haven't done the work. Right?
Exactly.
So giving people permission to go, I've got a real love-hate relationship, because I think every person would at some point, unless they're right, like, here deep in disease, right, of eating disorders, they would be able to find one thing positive. It's kind of like, I sometimes start with, well, can you thank your feet? Because your feet are helping you to walk, right? There's always something we can find.
Absolutely.
So I love that body neutrality thing, because I think it's a really powerful tool to give people permission to be real.
Yeah. So, that's in our world what we would call toxic positivity, really having that belief that we can jump from one extreme to the other without really sitting in that space and how that feels for ourselves.
And it adds more weight, right? Because you would know probably firsthand, I'm sure people would have said, just don't worry about it.
Yeah.
You'll be fine. You're beautiful. Da, 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 da. And if you could have received that and got that, you would have, because you're a smart girl, but it was so much deeper than that.
Yeah.
So that, you're right, that toxic positivity of, come on, let's go. It is what it is. Like, be grateful. All of those things is really unhelpful.
Yeah. And I think to the best of our intentions, we want to, if we see people struggling, like that's where we tend to go.
Yeah.
Is to speak.
We want them to be okay.
Exactly. Yeah. And speak into that external, like how they look, or, wanting to boost their self-esteem in that way. But we know, like, the more that we sort of comment on appearance, it feeds that cycle again and again. And that should be the focus.
It's really hard, isn't it? Because I'm even thinking of myself. I'm a really big, I compliment strangers, right? So I literally yesterday, my husband and I went out for a coffee and we were walking through the car park, and this woman, she would have been in her 60s. Like, she was just rocking a great look. And I literally said to her, random, you look amazing.
Yeah.
And she was like, sorry, what? I was like, no, you really look amazing. And I just needed to tell you.
Yeah.
So is that something that we shouldn't be doing? Do you know what I mean? Or, like, I don't know. I wouldn't want to stop doing that. But I also, I guess in fairness, I don't know her story. And maybe she was someone that was unhelpful, although her face said otherwise. I'm just going to say. But I am a big complimenter of, sadly, random strangers of, like, you look amazing. So is that something that I shouldn't be doing? I don't know.
Not at all. Like, I think, I think when we have these conversations, we sort of, we can get to this place of, like, what is okay and what's not okay.
It's too hard.
Suddenly everything's not okay. And I think, complimenting people is such a beautiful, beautiful thing to brighten somebody's day, that random act of kindness. But I think, the point of distinction there is really if that's everything that we're complimenting somebody on. And,
I'm never seeing her again, right? So,
Yeah. And I think it just goes back to that, what's the emphasis placed on if, we're speaking to our children or young people in our lives, are we only focusing on, appearance and externally, or is it, so much more than that? They're the way that they,
who they are.
Exactly who they are, what lights them up, all of those things.
Yeah. I'm not sure if you know this, and it's okay if you don't, but what's the statistics around ages of when does, like, an anorexia or bulimia or orthorexia, what are the age groups that are starting in the starting blocks, or is there none? It's just kind of random.
Yeah, that's such a great question. And a lot of, we know, eating disorders don't discriminate gender, age, ethnicity.
Yeah, this is not just for women, right?
Exactly.
There's boys. And sorry to interrupt, I remember in one of my lectures many, many years ago, we had a nurse from Flinders Hospital come, and she was from the eating disorder unit. Yeah. She came and she was a guest speaker, and I'll never forget her. She was really incredible. But she was talking about, she shared with us that there was an 11-year-old boy in the stay at hospital. And I remember then just going, sorry, what? Because you honestly think it's mainly a girl issue. But it's not. We've got 11-year-old boys in eating disorder units here.
Absolutely. Yes, absolutely. And I think that's so important to remind ourselves. And I think society has sort of, pigeonholed what an eating disorder can look like. But absolutely, it's starting younger and younger. And there's people that I talk to, parents of, 9-year-old children that are sort of, going through the throes of an eating disorder, but it's even earlier. It's, body image concerns can start.
Yeah, they do.
Very early, very young.
Early. Okay, so I just want to, learn a little bit more about the Butterfly Foundation. Obviously, I know a bit about them. I'm happy for you to share about the organisation, but I'm also, really curious about, aside from them, like, what do parents do?
Yeah.
Right? What do we do? I mean, I remember many, many, many years ago, I had a client come to me who was very, very worried about their partner and was like, Lisa, I'm telling you, there's bulimia happening, right? But was a grown adult, right? And was like, what do I do? Like, what do we do? We don't know what to do. can you give, I guess, maybe one of the viewers an idea if this is their story or where they are creeping up to? What do we do, right? Yeah. And I'm guessing there's a, full spectrum, right? Because we don't go straight into clinics, although sometimes we do because people let it go for so long.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think if you are sort of noticing whether you're a carer of somebody that you love or you yourself are sort of identifying maybe this is, I'm at risk of developing an eating disorder or having some concerns around that, the Butterfly Foundation is a really great place to start. And they do a range of different, things. There's so many different avenues that you can take, but one of those could just be calling up anonymously on the helpline and speaking to a trained professional who can navigate that space for you and hold the line with you and really, just explore what's happening and point you in that next step, because it can be so overwhelming to think, I have, my child is portraying some kind of scary warning signs. Yeah. I just don't know where to go.
Yeah, correct.
They can really help navigate who's in your support system, whether it's at school or whatever other community you have around you, but also then walk you through those next steps of potentially, going to a GP, getting a diagnosis, navigating that treatment.
I think it's also really important to acknowledge and identify that for a lot of women, there's chapters and seasons where their relationship with the way they look is being challenged, right? I think about, women that are postpartum. I think about women that are going through menopause. I think about young teens that are kind of, heading into, that womanhood and puberty and their hormones are kind of, there's so many different stages. I think also about the woman who is grieving and can't sleep, can't eat. I think about the woman who has addictions in her life, and the impact on the way she feels and the way she looks. There's a lot of reasons why sometimes we don't like what we see in the mirror, right? It might be the woman who whose partner and husband has just left them, right? So it's not always just about size and weight and it can be the wrinkles, it can be the hair going grey, the skin looking manky and do you know what I mean? Like life has hit, right? And I know for me in my life when I've had trauma and there's been crisis, I ain't looking fab, and I can see that, like I know that, but I also don't have the capacity to even care about it, but I hate it, right? And so it's that real wrestle around, what would you say to the woman in a season or chapter of her life across the board that is challenging?
That's such a good question. And I think it's really beautiful how you talked about that relationship with our body is going to ebb and flow and change in so many different seasons. And I think that in itself, speaks to the journey that we walk with this body that we have. Yeah. And it comes back to, not that toxic positivity or that toxic relationship that we can have with just love your body or just accept your body, but really coming back to that place of understanding, we're on this journey that we're walking through life, and
life happens.
And it's, in that way it is, I suppose, some radical acceptance of
I love that radical acceptance. Yeah, I love that. And it takes me back to our grief and loss days at uni. It's just the fact that when life happens in the minor, sometimes it's minor, sometimes it's major, it's about that radical acceptance of this isn't forever. It doesn't have to be forever. Sometimes people, unfortunately, it becomes forever, but that's because they get stuck and maybe don't have the external support. I was speaking only this morning to a really good girlfriend of mine who who's having a radical life experience, not for good. And she was saying how in the last week or so, she hasn't cooked, she hasn't cleaned, she hasn't, and she's like, I look hell. And I was like, but this is a season. Like it's not going to be like this forever. And actually this is all you can do this week.
100%.
And that is okay.
Yeah.
Right. And I think it also is around that reality and understanding that we need people. And I think when we think body image and correct me if I'm wrong, but when I think about eating disorders, it's such a siloed and solo experience, right? But we need community, we need support, and we need people in our life that can nurture, but can also go, Hannah, it's time.
Yeah.
Right?
Absolutely. And I think, that speaks so beautifully. I love that. The importance of community is central to, going through those different seasons. And like you said, sometimes it's just survival.
Correct.
And that's the best that we can do. And I think survival is, if you get to the end of the day, that just saying, I survived, I got through, I think that's so powerful. But like you say, relying on other people to sort of come alongside gently and nurture, but also to gently challenge when needed as well.
Yeah. And I think also, I guess I'm really thinking about mums that are navigating this with kids. And by kids, I'm not just talking minors, I'm talking they've got adult children, right? Who maybe they're a grandma even, and their adult kids are struggling, and it's obvious. I think it's about the power of having good people in our life, right? But also, if we don't, because that's also a common thing, people, really struggle sometimes to have close relationships. There are people like yourselves, and there's other experts out there who are literally their whole professional life is to support that single mum or that single dad or that someone who's like, help.
Yeah.
Right. And that you are someone that can stand in the gap, right? For people that have friends that don't know how to navigate it, that have friends that don't understand it, or are judgy, or are just not capable.
Yeah.
For so many different reasons, So I think, what you do is amazing. And I would imagine the impact, I know the impact because I've sent people to you, right? I know the impact that your lived experience, but your expertise has. And I just want to honor you for that, because I don't think this is going away anytime soon. And as we probably can even feel in this conversation, the root system is so big.
Yeah.
It's not just food, body, maybe exercise. It's so much bigger than that.
100%. Yeah.
And I think one of the things that we haven't touched on, which, I would be remiss of me not to acknowledge, is women and humans that have experienced sexual abuse and the impact on their body.
Yeah.
The physical impact, but then that emotional and mental attachment to their body and things like that. And so this is not an easy conversation. This is not an easy subject that we just go, oh, here's off the shelf. There's 10 steps, you'll be fine. Each person is so unique, and I'm sure you see that. The people that come through your doors, the stories are wide and varied.
Yeah, exactly. And I think it's like you say, it would be remiss of us to kind of skip over that conversation, especially, when we know the goal that we're sort of aiming towards in terms of building and bolstering our body image and feeling safe in our body. That might, again, not be the reality for so many, depending on,
their experience.
So
yeah. And I guess it's really about, it's not a one size fits all. And as we said at the very beginning of this, eating disorders, I guess have a label, but I know you and I are not into labels. Like, it's helpful information, but each person has so many different ingredients. And I guess what I would say, and I don't want to put words in your mouth, is for anyone that's watching this and it's been triggered something in them, it's that they are unique.
Yeah.
And you need to find the right people to cheer you on, as is for anything.
Absolutely.
And as therapists, that's our whole conversation, isn't it?
Absolutely. And just to know, you're deserving of that space to explore if you think these things are maybe just sort of bubbling away under the surface, or just really wanting to emphasize you're so deserving of that space to have that held and unpacked.
Well, tell me, just as we wrap up, what is important to understand for women that have maybe been through it and they've come out the other side like you? What are some of the, I guess, challenges ongoing, or do you believe that there are many circumstances where it's like, been there, done that, sorted it, don't need to look at it again?
Yeah, totally. I think that's such a beautiful question. I think in the early stages of recovery and being recovered from an eating disorder, I think people can sort of tiptoe around you or kind of walk on eggshells a little bit in terms of not wanting to trigger or not wanting to, open up a conversation. So that can be kind of a challenging space to navigate when internally I was like, I just want to talk about this because it's, so important to me and part of my journey and what's made me who I am. But I think as well, the really beautiful thing about choosing recovery and recovering from an eating disorder is you can choose that it can be in the past. So it doesn't have to, be part of your story. I've sort of chosen the opposite approach and wanting to use that as in the work that I do because I'm passionate about using that as a way to connect with others. And I think it's really important to name as well that experience of an eating disorder. Yes, while full recovery is possible and you can heal that relationship with food and body and it not be something that people are often told it's just something you're going to have to live with for the rest of your life and navigate that space. I think working with clients and really shedding hope into that or speaking hope into that is so important that, that part of me that maybe was perfectionistic or people pleasing, that is part of who I am. It doesn't sit at the CEO seat anymore in my life, but it's part of the conversation still, and it's served a purpose in my life in many different ways. And so for me, if I do hear that kind of inner critic voice or whatever might be raising its head in my life, just sort of reframing that as, this is part of who I am. It's been part of my journey, but I don't need that necessarily anymore. It's more of a warning system of things that might be, off kilter a little bit. I might be overly stressed.
It's like a red flag.
Exactly. Yeah. So kind of reframing that as what was a really harmful kind of inner critic voice can now be, I think, reframed helpful to understand.
Yeah, and I love that because it's like the very things that caused us pain and maybe caused us to head into a certain way in life. It's the pivoting of that and using embracing them as allies and going, when they raise up, the red, we're not at red yet.
Yes.
But, the flags are starting to head towards the red.
Yeah.
And I love that because as humans, no matter what happens in life with experiences, whatever it can be, whether it be a career challenge or a relationship, marriage challenge or whatever, we are who we are, right? And so, and our self-esteem and our values and all of those things are innate in us. So it's not like we can just rub them out, right?
Yeah.
And just hope that they never raise the ugly side again.
Yeah.
But what you're saying is actually, no, I now use that as a bit of alarm bells.
Yeah.
And to be able to pivot.
Definitely.
Yeah.
And I think
that's hope, right?
Exactly.
That is the hope.
Yeah. Because I think so many people can get stuck in that place of, will recovery happen? If recovery is going to happen, I need to remove the eating disorder from my life. It needs
to be completely dead and buried.
Yeah.
And then they have an experience, maybe they had a challenge at 15 and then they're 32 and they're postpartum and all of a sudden they're hearing the same voice again, but they're like, no, you were meant to be dead and buried.
Yeah.
Right?
Yes.
But it sounds the same, but it looks a bit different.
Totally.
And I would imagine that can be a bit frightening.
Totally. Because it's like, I thought I dealt with this. Yeah. And here it is again in my life.
Yeah.
But I think, that is such a powerful reframe to be, to consider that part, yes, it served a purpose at 15 and it was harmful and maladaptive, but it still met a need in a way, but it wasn't ultimately helpful for my health and well-being.
Oh, yeah.
But now seeing that, not necessarily an eating disorder voice, but that inner critic that might pop up or, being able to sort of see, okay, how can I use this? Or thank you, inner critic for,
embracing it.
Yeah.
And going, I needed to hear you.
Yeah.
So I knew what was going on.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah, love it. Love it. And I love what you do. And I think I speak for parents and women who are maybe walking this out. We need people like you, right, that are really so proactively in the space of wanting to support people at a very, very deep level. So keep being amazing. And, obviously I'll see you in the office tomorrow.
Yeah.
And I'll see you soon. That's it.